So I wanted to discuss something that was brought to my attention. I was in the spirit, and you know, I've heard, glamorizing, glamour, glamorizing the gospel. So I went to go look out what it meant, because this is how sometimes, God lays certain things on you, that, has to be addressed, that when God lays it on you, this is the reason why you would have to come and, alert people about certain things, because, there's a people that, that tend to not have a lack of understanding, and this is the reason why people, they suffer. We would want to, see certain works coming to fruition. We would want to see, the redemptive power of God be manifested in our reality. But if people are under a certain illusion, that illusion, it creates confusion. This goes into a detail in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 11, when God sent a strong delusion over the people because they didn't have a love for the truth. When people are presented with the truth, it's a spirit inside of them that rejects it and turn away from it, and this is the reason why they are still under an illusion. So first we wanted to get into what glamour is, because there's a glamorizing of the gospel that takes the gospel out of context, and it allows people to get a superficial version of the actual teachings of Christ, and because of that you don't see what Christ is or who Christ is or how to receive Christ. So there's a glamorizing or glamorization of the gospel, that if you don't know what it is, then you would go along just continuously practicing a glamorized version of the gospel. And one thing you have to understand is that God is not glamorous. God is not about glamour. God is not glitzy and glamorous, and these are, this is an AI overview, and with the AI overview, this is someone giving you what artificial intelligence, how useful it can be, as opposed to it being something that thinks for you, or that takes over just all of your activities. No, it can work, hand in hand with you, because it's unopinionated and unbiased rendering of information. And being that there's a system or something that is set up that does that, this can in turn help humanity have that same type of input, unbiased and undoctored information. It doesn't matter from what source it comes from. So this is, again, AI overview. So let's get into what glamorizing the gospel means. And again, the spirit normally convicts you. If you're a part of those that are glamorizing the gospel, or glamorizing Christ, or glamorizing God, and trying to establish some sort of version that doesn't reflect the spirit of God, the spirit of Christ, the spirit of the teachings of Christ, then this is only for you to repent. And you have to understand that the power of God is redemptive. So you are able to be redeemed, through things that you don't know. This is what will keep you from suffering, from suffering the lack of knowledge, by having the knowledge. So Glamorizing the gospel refers to presenting the Christian faith and its message in a way that emphasizes outward appearance, superficiality, or worldly success, rather than focusing on the core message of repentance, faith, and following Christ's teachings. Here's a more detailed explanation. What it means. Glamorizing the gospel can involve highlighting material blessings, celebrity endorsements, or a focus on personal happiness and achievements as the primary outcome of faith, rather than emphasizing humility, service, and sacrifice. Why it's a concern? Some critics argue that this approach can lead to a distorted understanding of Christianity, where people join or stay in the faith primarily for the perceived benefits rather than for genuine spiritual conviction. So there's where the discrepancy lies. Some people join Christianity because they may see that there's people that are being prosperous in it, and because they believe that Christianity can have a beneficial financial or material or even a social benefit to it, rather than having a genuine spiritual conviction, and that's where you would get a distorted or misunderstanding of it. So for example, you have the prosperity gospel. This teaching emphasizes that financial wealth and good health are signs of God's favor, which can be seen as a form of glamorizing the gospel, glamorizing the gospel. Focus on success over service. Some churches or ministries may emphasize worldly achievements and popularity as evidence of a strong faith, rather than focus on acts of service and compassion. Using social media to promote a glamorous image of Christianity. Some Christians or ministries may use social media to present a carefully curated, often unrealistic image of their faith and lives, which can be seen as a form of glamorizing the gospel. That's on social media, even in the media, even televangelists, all these people can have a form of glamorizing the gospel. The true gospel as taught in the Bible emphasizes humility, service, and following Christ's teachings, even when it means facing hardship and persecution. This is biblical. This is biblical. If they told you that the world hated Christ and they're going to hate you for my name's sake, they hated me first, and the world's going to hate you because they hated me first. And these are some ways that we misconstrue the teachings and even the gospel itself, which is the good news. And we conceptualize it as, with when we have the prosperity, that's one of God's plans, is for you to prosper. But there's a gospel that focuses primarily on financial stability and good health as signs of God's favor. And that's what that states there. And that's you have to stop glamorizing the gospel. This is just a couple of things that if you wanted to go and look further into it and get a better understanding of what it means to glamorize. Glamorize and glorifying is not the same thing. When you're dealing with glamour, you're dealing with an appearance that appeals to people, and it makes yourself seem more desirable and more attractive, And there's a big difference between that and glory. The glory or glorifying of God. The glamour of of yourself takes away the glory, from God in particular. And this is the gospel is not a fairy tale. No, it's for true disciples. It's for true disciples. It's not about a fairy tale. It's you have to take what's stated and what's been given to you as it, especially if you have faith, you have to take it in as these are actually, these words are lived by. When you believe it, these are things that you live by. If you believe it but don't live by it, then you really don't believe it. You don't believe it. This is why true believers, then they have non-believers. Non-believers are people that believe, but that can say they believe, but they do not follow, because they don't believe that it has that impact or effect. So there's a way that you can follow a glamorous version of the gospel, and that's not the gospel. You want the glory of the gospel. You want the glory of it, because the glory has a spiritual significance behind it. And when you get the spiritual significance, the spiritual meaning of it, then you change, you're reformed. Now, you've been made into a new creation. This is why certain people, that have the spirit, they are actually like set apart. And because of that, people that don't have it, that might congregate, and they would treat these people like outcasts. We seen that with the Pharisees, and we seen that with the high priest, and we seen that all throughout the Bible. If they had prophets, they would attack the prophets. They attacked it. Prophets, it's like a bootleg version of certain things. If the genuine article, if everybody got the bootleg version of a certain name brand or a designer, because we want to talk about that, because this is going to go into what we call vanity, but we're going to talk about that right now. If 20 people got the bootleg version of a certain designer or a certain brand, and there's one person that actually has the genuine article, they would make the one with the genuine article or the genuine brand feel uncomfortable. They would try to either stay away from him, so that their version of it appears to be the genuine, or they would make the person with the genuine article seem as though that they don't have the genuine article, or they would make him feel uncomfortable or make her feel uncomfortable. But that goes into vanity, and vanity comes along with glamour, but we'll talk about glamour. So glamour refers to an alluring beauty or charm, while glorified means to praise or honor something or someone to an extreme degree, often to a point of idealization. Idealization. And you would think that, hey, AI got it wrong. You mean idolization? No, idealization, which is a different meaning from idolatry or idol worship. But it's a point of idealization. Here's a more detailed explanation. Glamour refers to an attractive and often superficial charm or appeal. Can be associated with beauty, elegance, or excitement. So there's a way for there's numerous people that I've seen that said that the Christian faith is all about elegance, and you have to be a certain way, you have to do certain things a certain way, and I know that that's not true. I know personally that it's not true. And it's synonymous which includes charm, attractiveness, and glamour. This is glamour is the British English spelling. Example: the movie star's life was filled with glamour. It was filled with glamour. So the glamour is sometimes something that captivates people and it lures people in. This is why it became a sin, especially in this world. This world, when you'll find out that this world, what we call the matrix, is nothing but, the repetitive cycle of sin, and how it's, displayed to us on a daily basis, and it keeps entrapping us and ensnaring us. And until we are able to break free from that, we are not what you would call escaping the matrix. And like I stated in one of my let me see if I can find it. I stated on my page, that imagine I've never seen the matrix, don't even know what it's about, but I see the matrix and I know everything it's about. Like, I can see the matrix, I can see what it is. When you go here, let me see if you can pull it up here. When you go, here, this is like the matrix. Every day there's, stuff shown to you. Federal judge rules Trump administration cannot immediately deport toughs. They cannot immediately. This just a common, news that's being shared. Money, the talk about money. Elon Musk is now a part of this, just the ongoing, loop of information, which would create wrath, which would create anger, and when you're talking about, cookies and food and stuff like that, it would create like greed and gluttony, and just the overall want for certain things, and envy certain things, and praise of certain things. These are ways that you can understand that it's a system that is set up, which is called the matrix. But we'll get into that. But this is one thing that I actually stated, which was actually a month ago, and this is coming back to inform you that I don't know. I've never seen the matrix. I still haven't seen it. I don't know. You hear people talk about it, but you don't understand or don't know what it is, but you understand what it is. It's a system that it keeps you boxed in, and if you don't want to wake up to it, then certain things you shouldn't pay attention to. But inside of that system, religion is in that system. Religion is not for you to improve yourself, is for you to be a part of. Is for you to be a part of. And once you're a part of it, then you're in that loop of the matrix. So the matrix has different facets of it, whether it's religion, politics, drugs, music, sex, all sorts of anything that's dealing with any kind of addiction, any type of materialism, any type of desires, any type of anger, violence, and stuff like that. All these things is intertwined with that system, and that's what you would call the matrix. And in order for you to be set apart from that, you can find another form of, because that matrix is meant for you to control. You could find a way for you to control your own reality, because there's no way for you to escape that matrix, be in that matrix, and have your own control of it. You're either part of that, or you're dealing with this, or you want that, or you're about this. So that's basically what the matrix is. That's basically what the matrix is. And you spoke about deception as crippling humanity. Well, the delusion is crippling humanity. The news is a very wicked and deceptive practice. Because the news is the voice for the matrix. The news is, and like I said, that's if you really wanted to boycott anything. Not that you advocate boycotting. If you really wanted to boycott anything, you would boycott the news, because the news is the source of all, the information, whether it's good information or bad information, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. The news is the source for it, and it caters and gears towards the people that have, developed an ear for it, and not only that they develop an ear for it, they develop a craving for it. So that's one of the things that the matrix consists of. So the movie star's life was filled with glamour. This is an example, like the life of a certain movie star, an entertainer, a politician, a certain billionaire, even a millionaire, even a thousandaire. But it's just a lifestyle that they present to you as a certain level of glamour. And this glamour normally ensnares, females. Females are amongst the first people to see nice things and want nice things. And because of that, they are able to be entranced by a glamorous lifestyle. So when you're thinking of glamour, you can reflect back to, a shiny red apple that Eve saw in the Garden of Eden. And because it caught her attention, it captivated her, and she saw it and she wanted it. This can be, a form of glamorizing. You see something that was glamorous and you wanted it. So being that she wanted it, the man knew that he wasn't supposed to have it. He took part in it, and that was the fall of mankind. So sometimes glamour is a part of the destruction of mankind, and how you can understand glamour is, you look at our celebrities, for instance, each rap artist that you see nowadays, they would have these chains. Those are glamorous things. They look glamorous. You want to let me show you real quick. We got BG that just got out. BG, new chain. Let's just put his new chain, and they'll probably show you a picture of it. This is all about glamour. You see, it's a glamour. Shows off his new chain that features a rat in the casket. That advocates, a rat in the casket. And violence or people that rat and people that snitch. So this is, you can't tell the truth. A rat knows the truth. You can't be a truth teller. You can't be somebody that knows the truth and then tells the truth. These are, not children of God. You got to understand, God has a certain quality and characteristic that his children have as well. And one thing that you have to understand about the children of God is that they are loyal. They are loyal. And Christ was loyal. If you know that Christ was loyal to God when it was time for him, to suffer the hardship, and he didn't, go back on his word. He was given an opportunity to go back, and plead with people, and plead with, Pilate, plead with the Pharisees, and turn on his disciples. He stayed loyal. So one of the qualities of, God's children is loyalty. They are very loyal. And this is one of the telltale signs of them. They are loyal, So inside the matrix, inside of the world that we live in, there's a promoting of what you call cheating, which is a form of disloyalty, and it's promoted to you on a daily basis through men and through women. Just talk about it, just do it, and they're prompted to do it, because it's a way that's adverse to the ways of God, So these are ways that you can tell who and what the children of God are. They are loyal, and the devil knows that. So if the wicked knows that you are loyal, they can get you to be loyal to the wrong thing, and and there's a righteous form, it's a right form of loyalty, and it's a wicked form of loyalty. You're loyal to, sin, and then you can be loyal to, what's right. And if you fall into sin, your loyalty to what's right would correct you, and it'll make you get out of this wicked form of loyalty. Because I had a friend one time, a real friend, and I want to talk about that because this is real important that I discuss that. He was loyal. He was a loyal person, and I knew that about him. Like, that's one of his qualities. And being that you knew that he was loyal, that only indicates that he's a child of God. This is how you can tell it. Children of God. First, he came to me as a friend. He saw something in me that probably nobody else could see, because you can identify who's of you and who's not of you. So, we got to discuss this some other time, because you can't just brush over that, because this is part of a redemptive thing, But this is just showing you that these chains, when they get new chains, they're put on, to show you certain things. I believe that this was a new chain that he had, but it's all about glamour, glitzy and glamour, and this is something that appeals to the females, not to males, but they want it because this appeals and it's alluring to females, you understand? And that's just something I wanted to show you. But they all got new chains like that, They all got them. It's all about the glamour. It's all about glamour. It's glamorous. Glamour. You understand? It's all about glamour, glitzy and glamour. Which, like I said, it's alluring to people. It would entrance the people, and then it would lure people in, and it would make others want that same thing. It would make other people say, what, I want that, so I can have that same type of status, so it can appear that I have that same type of status. But this is just how it works when it comes to glamour. When it comes to glamour, and like I said, glamour and glory, there are two different things. So here we have the glamour. Then you would have glory. Means to praise or honor something or someone to a high degree, often to the point of exaggeration or idealization. Can also mean to make something seem more important or impressive than it is. Synonyms include praise, honor, exalt, or extol. Examples: the team glorified their victory with a big celebration, or the movie glorified violence, making it seem exciting and glamorous. So these are ways to distinguish glorify and glamour. When you give praise and honor to something or someone to a high degree, you would always want to give that to what created everything. To not to not disregard. It's just the contribution to life itself. You would not want to disregard that, and that will be attributed to the creator of all, to what you would call the God. This is why you would have them use the terminology the Most High God, because you can also glorify other beings as a God or a deity. And that's another story for another story. But glamour, a quality of thing or people that make that or thing, quality and thing or people that make them seem appealing and attractive. Glorification, admiring or praising something in an exaggerated manner, unjustifiably. Like, why do you praise God? God is good. Well, why is God good? God is good because God is good. You probably can't even justify it. Just justify it. Why is God good? And you suffering all this hardship, and you're doing, because it's already been stated that you would, if you're with me, then you're going to suffer. And that's one of the reasons why you would state that. It's already been written. That's how you know who you are. If you're not, you haven't went through any kind of hardship, you haven't suffered anything, you might have to reconsider your association with God. And like I said, these are things that when you're ignorant to certain things, you don't understand them. But even in your ignorance, God is still able to show you and reveal certain things to you. So for me, that's one of the reasons why I know that God is good, and you can't justify it by certain things that you have, or if you would have to exaggerate it. This is just the definition. You would even have to exaggerate it. Just not giving that to anybody else. You would even look at your mother and your father. But if it wasn't for their mother and their father and their mother and their father, then certain events wouldn't have led up to me being here. So you can look at the detail of how intricate and how fragile life is, because if hundreds of years ago, if my great grandfather and my grandmother was in a certain place at a certain time and never crossed paths, then I wouldn't be here. And if I wouldn't be here, then I wouldn't be able to give you that praise. But how delicate life is, to the point where if my mother was sick one day and my father went to school and my mother didn't go to school, and he liked it somebody else or she liked it somebody else, then I would be a completely different person. But because things have worked out in a course that put them on a certain timeline, and they met when they met, then you have to understand how just reflecting on how fragile and delicate life is, and you can only attribute it to God. Like, timing is everything, So this is why you would give God the glory for that, because as events unfold, these events will have an effect on future events. Every event has an effect on a future event. That's why you would have the wicked trying to play God by staging events to create other events, because they know the power of setting things in motion. What God sets in motion is a work of wonder, and how God sets it in motion has people that's scientists and all sorts of researchers trying to wonder or try to figure out the wonders of God. And this is something that you can't figure out to this day. There's no justifiable explanation that they can come up with the essence and beginning of this thing that we call life. So they come up with certain assumptions and theories of how things work and why they work, because they're really trying to dissect God and disprove God, but there's no way you can actually do that. And this is why you give God the glory, because God has a lot of enemies here that would like to disprove God, but you just can't. You can't disprove God. And that's just how it goes. So that's what glamour and glorification. So what we have is another AI overview, which the last one was also an AI overview. So when you say God is not glamorous, the statement God is not glamorous can be interpreted in various ways, but it generally suggests that a true understanding of God's nature and purpose is not about superficial or worldly appeal, but about inner qualities and service. It's all about your inner qualities and service. So when somebody says, divine King Yoshi, that's what I would call myself. If you look me up on, some of my games and some of my on my page, and you would think, well, this guy think he's a king, or divine king. Is what it means is God, a servant of God. Yoshi is a servant of God. Is a servant. How do you serve God? By being who you are. By being yourself, so that you can be used by God. You're not a divine king. This is why there's a discrepancy with kings and kings, because in the world, kings become completely different. Queens become something completely different. It becomes a person of high glamorous status, but that's not who kings are. They are actually servants. So when you dedicate your life to serving and servitude, then you are actually being a king. When you know who you are and you know that you come from God, you are dedicating yourself to what's divine, to your divine nature, to your true nature. I come from God. This is who I am. Who are you? You black? Afro-American? No. Chinese? No. Who are you? I'm divine. I come from God. No, you come from Africa. I come from elsewhere. You might have picked some people up. You from America. No, that's where some people may have been. You're Egyptian. No, that's where you might have seen some statues and some writings. You're a Hebrew. No, that's what people might believe they are. Because that's what book they got it in, a form of book. In that book, it may have told them that that's who they was, but I come from God, and nobody can tell me different. And that's not you being arrogant. That's you being completely, absolutely said that I come from God. If God created all and everything that's here is a creation of God, and the way that you're not a creation of God is when you deter from that, then no, I'm going to stay with that. I'm going to live by that. And why would you want to come from God if they said that God is hated here? Because that's who I am. That's, God's nature and purpose is not about superficial or worldly appeal, but about inner qualities and service. The inner qualities, the spiritual qualities that a person can have, patience, humility, kindness. These are inner qualities, generosity, compassion. It's all inequalities. So it's the inequalities that are into service, in service, So here's a breakdown of potential interpretations and related concepts. Focus on service and humility. The phrase could be interpreted as emphasizing that serving God and living a life of faith is not about seeking fame or recognition, but about humility and dedication to His will. Humility and dedication to His will. And inner beauty versus outer appearance. It could also suggest that true beauty and value lie not in outward appearances or possessions, but in inward character, compassion, and a relationship with God. God's nature. God's nature is beyond human understanding. So it's beyond human understanding. What is the nature of God? We'll talk about the nature of God when we get into the story of Christ. When Christ said that anybody that knows me knows the Father, So if you know the nature of Jesus, then you know the nature of God. If you know Jesus, then you know the Father. If you've met Jesus, then you've met the Father. So this is how, you understand the nature and quality of God. And Christ came here as a servant. He came here to serve, not to be served. Not to be served, but to be a servant, which made him a king. This is why he's the king of all kings, because he's the true definition of what a king is. He shamed those people that should have been kings at the time, that should have been the one serving, but they was, living a glamorous lifestyle. There's no record of Christ having this big, overcoat and all these draping stuff over him and looking all pious and modest. No, he looked at lowly, like, the people that he came from amongst, and he chose to be lowly, like the people that he came from amongst, So these are the ways that you can tell the nature of God and how God would just, yeah. The statement can reflect, see, incomprehensible is sometimes you can't even explain it. The statement could reflect the idea that God's nature is vast and incomprehensible, going beyond any human concept of glamorous or attractive. Like, you can't even say that's glamorous. No, that's common. Anybody could put on jewelry and be glamorous, and that attract people. Anybody can do that. That doesn't mean that they have the nature of God in them. So at one point in time, when I was in the streets, doing illegal activity, and God told me, like, son, you can't do that because you already have the glory on you. Now, if you put that on you, then that would appear as if that's where your glory comes from. And if you get in any kind of trouble because of that, you deny my protection. What you're doing is outside of my protection. What you sell drugs? You want money? Why do you want that? To look like them? That's not my glory. That's not where my glory comes from. So you're gonna have to step away from that. So this is how, if you don't understand how God would speak to you, or God, converses with you and would instruct you, like, yo, you got to step away from that, then I'm not sure if you have that kind of, that inner connection to God. So God will convict you for certain things that are worldly, and if you hear and hearken to the voice of God and you have a heart for God, you would have to turn away from it. And that's just the bottom line. There's no way around it. If God says that's, son, you have to stop that, you cannot do that, then you have to stop it, and you can't do it. Not man. Man can't, convict you unless, they are actually walking with God. But you can't be people that zero in on people and say that, hey, bro, you doing that. God will convict you. God will convict you, and deed of your course. Especially if you're going on the wrong path, God will get you off of that path. And if you love God like you say you do, you will turn away from certain things and just not do them. So Jesus, as a central figure in many religions, is often seen as a model of humility and service, right? Jesus is a model of humility and service, not someone who sought worldly glamour or power, And you have to understand, Jesus was offered the same kind of power that most people are offered. And because he belonged to God, he refused. He was tempted just like everybody else would be tempted. And this is one of the things that, the rappers do. They're set up to tempt you, to live that, to pursue that. Movie stars is tempted to get you to pursue that. This is why you would have a lot of people, when you see them in certain pictures, they're flashing money, because their whole objective is to get you to pursue that, because the money is the generative and the overall god of that system. That's the god of the system, and whoever controls the money is in control of the god of that system. So that's the system, what you will call the matrix, or a matrix, a certain system that people are stuck in. And if you get out of it, now you're able to see, the works of it. But people inside of it don't see the works of it. And even if they did, because they envy certain facets of it, they are still going to pursue, being a part of it. That's why when there's people that come out and tell you certain things, like Kanye West, told you, certain things about certain people, there was no kind of, investigation or backlash on them, because it doesn't matter, because everybody inside of that system wants in on that system. That's why there's not a such thing as a system like that just collapsing just like that. It's no such thing, because as you get one person, like if you go after one, the next day 20 to 100 of them are created. 20 or 100 of them are created. I've seen some people just yesterday, they was asking them, white people now, these are Caucasian people, what kind of drip you got on, what kind of drip you got on. They talking this, that, $100 chain, this, this and all. So it's an ongoing thing that if you can't bring everything to an end, it'll never end. So for there to be a new earth or something to pass away and a new thing to come about, that means that you would have to get out of that system. You can't have that system still intact and there being a new thing, unless you completely come out of that thing. And in order for you to come out of that thing, there has to be an alternative thing for you to go into. So the new earth is an alternative to the old earth, and the old earth is, is a cycle of sorrow and tragedy, and death. This is what's of the old earth. And how do you understand that? Look at your news, So if the new earth is not about that, then they have different concerns of the old earth, different concerns, different things that pique my interest. This is something completely different than that. It's not the same thing. It can't exist in there. It can't be conceitedness or vanity in there. It's a lot of conceitedness and vanity that would have to be swept away in order for a different perception of what is called appealing or what's attractive. You would see somebody's spirit attractive as opposed to their necklace attractive. That person has an attractive spirit. I love that person. You wouldn't look at it. You wouldn't judge people on their outer appearance, but on their inner appearance. So, focus on spiritual growth. The phrase could be a reminder to prioritize spiritual growth and inner transformation over material possessions or worldly achievements. So you focus on spiritual growth. Of just stating that, you find a person's spirit attractive as opposed to their chain or their clothes attractive. So that's how, you understand, that, God is not a glamorous. God is definitely not glamorous. Glamorous is of the devil. It's of temptation. Glamour tempts you. God is not one to tempt you. The devil tempts. So glamour is used as a form of temptation. So there's a glamorization of Christianity, of the gospel. And this is the reason why the spirit is not in it, because it comes along with a glamour, a glamorization of the teachings of Christ, as opposed to you receiving the Christ wholeheartedly and in its original form that it's supposed to be received, and you receive it in a glamorous fashion. So you would also get more in depth with, the Christian life is not glamorous. This was, I guess, 3 days ago. The cross, not glamorous but glorious. So the cross is not glamorous but glorious. I guess it's glorious that, Christ was crucified on a cross, and it's not something to be glamored about, to be like, yo, that was a glamorous thing, but it's a glorious thing that happened, because all the glory went to God. God's, this was a part of the will of God, in order to bring forth redemption. I'm not sure, because I didn't check this out, but if y'all want to check that out, y'all could. And another woman here, you have people misleading you. God is glamorous. God is glamorous is a spiritual platform dedicated to bring more women closer to God through entrepreneurship, motivation, and glamorous lifestyle. See? You have people that's going to speak, that's going to preach a different gospel, and this is how you're able to mislead people. I don't know. I don't know, but what this person has is a lot more followers than I got. But you don't judge people on the size of their ministry or their following, but you judge them on the spirit that they have. So you don't know who this person is, but that's one thing. God is not God is not about glamour, So what does this say? Sermon notes: Jesus may not be glamorous, but he will. Seeking the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind is not a glamorous thing, but it's what keeps us. Right? This is something that's supposed to keep you. It's not about glamour. Jesus isn't glamorous, but he will save our souls. Right? The what Christ taught you can save you. So not glamorous. For pastors, preachers, and Bible teachers, Jesus told him the truth without painting a glamorized version of what it was like to follow him. There is often very little glamour and a fair amount of humiliation. Quote by John: God's work is not nearly as glamorous as our self-glorifying ambitions. So you'll have all this stuff right here. All you got to do is just type this right here in Google, and all this will come up, so you can check that out at your leisure, so you can get more familiar with what's being stated or what's being said, so you could so you can understand for yourself, And all glitz isn't glamour implies that not everything that shines is truly valuable or meaningful. In the context of knowing Jesus, it means, here go this woman. I don't want. She's on TikTok too, She's on TikTok. So this was just a day ago. This was made. See? Hi, my name is Johanna Mary King, and I am the founder of God is Glamorous. I am also Christian artist, ministry leader, and Bible teacher. God is Glamorous. Mm. But I'm not sure, if if this comes from these recent plane tragedies are a satanic plot to instill fear, giving the enemy a foothold. But God has not called us to, a spirit of fear. That's the only thing you can possibly state. But um, you know. Jesus, Satan has been running the same tired lie, trying to convince believers that Jesus lived in lack, so will feel guilty. You know, in Jesus' own words, Jesus said, rabbits and foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And this is not his kingdom. If this was his kingdom, the people would be fighting to keep him from being handed over to the Jews. But his kingdom is not of this world. But in his kingdom, in his Father's kingdom, there are many mansions. So he stated that this isn't his kingdom. If it was, then it'd be ran different. So you'll have people that are false teachers, teaching you a different, Jesus, or a different story about Christ. So this is one thing you have to be aware of. And just because a person has a platform and a mouth, and a way to, um, vocalize certain things, that doesn't mean that, they are, just, they are righteous, and just because a person has a very little platform, and they aren't as articulate as others, that doesn't mean that they aren't right. They aren't right. Because they may have a certain quality that other people may lack, that exceeds or supersedes the need to have a certain mouthpiece. Because when I lived in Atlanta as a kid, there was this man that stayed downtown in Atlanta, and regardless of what time you went down there, and whenever you went down there, he was outside, with the Bible, and he couldn't speak, he couldn't talk, but he was telling the people about the word, and he couldn't even speak at all. He couldn't talk. Like something happened to his tongue. I'm not sure what happened, but he couldn't talk at all. But you understood everything that he was saying, and how he was giving it to you. I remember him like it was yesterday. I'm talking about, I was a kid at the time, but he always had like this hat, this army hat that looked like the hat that Fidel Castro wears. He always had his shirt tucked in his pants, and he would be out there, and he always had the Bible in his hand, and he just telling people like the Bible, and just pointing at the Bible, and what I mean, just and hey, that's glorious right there. That is glorious. You can't even silence somebody that can't even speak, to speak the truth. You can't even silence somebody. If you had the spirit, you understood exactly what he was trying to say, and not even trying to say what he was actually saying, and anybody that's from Atlanta would know what I'm talking about. Anybody. I remember him like it was yesterday. I remember his teeth and everything. He used to have a gap teeth. He was kind of light-skinned, and he always had his shirt tucked in his pants. And like I said, it doesn't matter when you went down there. You don't always go to 5 Point Atlanta, but every time you went down there, you could go there 1 month. He'd be out there that month. giving you the word. The next month you go out there, he's still out there giving you the word. You know what I mean? And he's adamant about telling you the truth, pointing at it and telling you, like, you know what I mean? And he couldn't speak, he couldn't talk. He had no speech, none at all, you know. So it's not about how articulate a person is, or how much they got, or how many people that they cater to, how many souls they think they saved, but they have only misled them because they're not giving you, you know, the real version. They're giving you a glamorous version of, you know, the word. And being that you're getting the glamorous version of the word, you're also getting the glamorous spirit. You know, you're getting the spirit of glamour. So you're picturing Jesus as, you know, this glamorous person. That's why it's kind of, you know, erroneous for them to put an image on Christ to make you believe that Christ look a certain kind of way, so you only receive Christ that look a certain kind of way. It's kind of demonic that they put an image on Christ, you know, because that'll make a people that can resemble Christ feel more proud about Christ, that'll feel more arrogant and more receptive to Christ, while there's others that may feel less of a connection to Christ, and because they feel less of a connection of Christ, they don't act on, you know, the spirit of Christ, when they actually may have the spirit of Christ, and the spirit of Christ might be needed to be activated in them. But because there's an image, you know, placed on Christ, people tend to stay away from it because they can't relate to that image. That image don't look nothing like me, you know. That image don't look like me. I'm not messing with that. So, and even if you did receptive, you would be looking at, you know, a particular people to come in that form and come in that fashion of Christ because of the image that was placed on Christ. That's why you should just have the just light. Since Christ was of light, then he should be nothing but light. And if you are, you know, one that follows the teaching of Christ, that light that was in Christ, you will reflect that light. You know, you will reflect it. You will reflect it back, as opposed to what color you look like, what race you in, what creed you're under. It doesn't matter. If you are one that adheres to the teaching of Christ and understand that Christ is light, you will reflect that light. And the light is, you know, one of the glories of God. And yeah, because, you know, not everybody is going to have it. Not everybody will want it because it's a glorious thing. You know, it's sure, yeah, it's glory. That man's, what happened to Christ and how triumphant Christ was, sure would like to be related to that. But they can't relate to the hardship that Christ had to endure, you know, but they will want the glory, you know. That's sort of like what somebody stated the other day. It was like, when you win your battles, people that wasn't a part of your battles shouldn't. It was something that they stated, and I said 9 times out of 10 they was a big part of the battle against you. You know, like, people shouldn't be included in your battles after you overcome them. You know, and I said that 9 times out of 10 those are the same people that was a part of the battles against you. I said something like that, but yeah, it's something that you have to acknowledge that is like. But, you know, vanity, which is a sin. You know, vanity is a sin, and this what keeps a lot of people from actually seeing the glory of Christ, because of, you know, vanity is associated with, you know, the 7 deadly sins, and that would be amongst, you know, pride. Pride is, you know, a form of vanity, you know, or vanity is a form of pride, and vanity is having excessive pride in one's appearance and achievements. So you're more proud about your appearance. This is why, you know, especially me online on this particular, you know, app on YouTube, you see a lot of people that that they come underneath the word and the banner of Christ. They speak for Christ, but they are still attached to these name brands, and these name brands are worldly name brands that our celebrities, they was responsible for promoting, and this comes along with glamour, glamour and glitz and stuff like that. When you come with, Gucci and Prada, Fendi, and Louis Vuitton, and all these name brands that show some form of idolatry. Is you idolize these things, and you can't separate yourself from them, So that goes with glamour. So in some religious contexts, particularly Christianity, vanity or excessive pride is in one's appearance or achievement is considered a sin, often seen as a form of pride, which is considered a fundamental sin. Here's a more detailed explanation. The Bible often uses vanity to describe things that are ultimately meaningless or lacking in true substance, and excessive pride is seen as a form of vanity. Excessive pride, can be seen as a form of vanity, where people are proud to be American, take pride in Americanism, take pride in, a certain gang, take pride in their religion, take pride in, whatever you take pride in is a form of, vanity, And pride is the antithesis of humility, to be humble, it's a form of, the adverse to being humble or having a form of humility, which is the antithesis of the teachings of Christ. Proverbs 31 verse 30 states, "Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised," suggesting that focusing on outward appearance is not the most important thing. The concept of vanity is also linked to the idea of self-idolatry. Vanity. You put self-idolatry, where individuals place themselves above God or others, by, attributing certain, fashions and name brands and fashion statements, and, this is how you become more, idol worshiping, with our makeup, with our haircuts, with our locks, with our gold teeth, with all these things, it puts us in a certain stage of, self-idol worship. We idolize ourselves, and we care more about our appearance, where individuals place themselves above God or others. Some interpret vanity as a form of pride, which is considered the root of many other sins. Pride is the root of others, is the root of other sins. That's a saying too, In Christian tradition, vanity is often associated with pride, which is considered one of the 7 deadly sins. Other sins associated with vanity includes lust. Vanity can lead to a focus on outward appearance and worldly desires. Greed. Vanity can involve a desire for material possessions or social status. Greed. Envy. Vanity can lead to jealousy of others' achievements or possessions. Envy, you can want what others have. You can want a certain status that other people have, And this is what, vanity is used to do. Is used to, lure you into sin. And like I said, the sin is what this world is ran on. And this is what becomes the matrix. All the sins that the world revolves around and that it's ran on is the matrix. So that is the way that I can only prescribe. Because like I said, I never seen the matrix. But if it's something that's meant for you to escape, then these are things that you have to escape. These things that if you are able to overcome them, you are outside of the matrix. You are outside of them. You beat the matrix by overcoming these. This is how you are able to step outside of that And if you don't want to, then don't find out what it is that'll help you to overcome it. Because if you don't know, then you're really not responsible for it. You're just a victim of it. But if you do know and you choose this stuff, if you choose to follow the ways and the traditions of the world and the patterns of the world, and you know what it is that'll separate you from that, then this is what gets you held accountable and found guilty of these sins. If you don't know that, then don't take, what is it, a red pill or a blue pill. If you don't know that this is what the world is ran on, but then there's other things like these things up here, when you see the seven stars, and you might see the 7 deadly sins, that means that you're underneath these things. This is what's protecting you, the 7 virtues that you need to combat these 7 deadly sins, these 7 virtues against 7 sins. Now, because you're in this world as well, because you're not out of this world, if you're in here to give people certain type of wisdom that they might not be able to get anywhere else, or you're trying to pull people along with you, and you might get trapped off by some of these as well. But you have that always hanging above you, that you acknowledge is above you, and that beneath you, and to the point where you can't even see it. And if you don't, you succumb to it, that'll be over you. Lust, greed, envy, wrath, sloth, pride, all these things would be over you. You would have that over you, as opposed to, the 7 virtues. We'll get into those, but beyond religion, philosophically, vanity can be seen as a broader form of egotism and pride. Egotism, which is a form of what you call narcissism. So vanity and narcissism goes hand in hand. Let's see. While both narcissism and vanity involves a strong focus on oneself, narcissism is a personality disorder characterized by grandiosity, need for admiration, and a lack of empathy, while vanity is a more general trait involving excessive pride in one's appearance and accomplishment. That's NPD, it will be called narcissistic personality disorder. But they basically go hand in hand. But this is AI also giving you this information. I'm gonna say vanity is a form of narcissism. While vanity can sometimes be a characteristic associated with narcissistic personality disorder, it is not the same thing. Vanity is primarily about appearance, while narcissism involves a more complex set of traits, including a grandiose sense of self-importance and a need for admiration, which, I guess this would be a more of an extreme version of vanity that would, after falling into the sin of vanity, you would become more narcissistic. So narcissistic personality disorder would probably stem from pride and vanity, but that's just that's that. So excessive focus on appearance, seeking admiration and attention, believing oneself to be superior to others, a lack of humility. these are all examples of, vanity, which if I always, close that with that. Generative AI is experimental, And what does the Bible say about vanity? Vanity is an enemy of the spirit and must be constantly brought to the cross and crucified. That is, Galatians chapter 20. Let's see if we could, check that out. Galatians chapter 2 verse 20 states, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Here's a breakdown. Paul emphasized, it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. Paul emphasizes that his life is no longer controlled by his own desires or actions, but rather by the power and presence of Christ living within him. So, that's when you bring vanity to the cross and you crucify it on the cross, like it dies to you. And you no longer live by your own desires or your own, selfish ambition and personal ambitions. It dies when you start to live with the Christ that's within you. When Christ lives in you, So that's just, Galatians chapter 2 verse 20. And you will hear King Saul let vanity here, I believe. Let's see. Dead to sin, alive in Christ. God forbid, how shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? So once the sin dies, to you, you are able to, to not live with it anymore, because you have brought it out of you and you've confronted it. Now, being that it's on the outside of you, it no longer lives in you. Then you put Christ in you, and that's what lives inside of you. Dead to sin. So you have to be dead. No, I don't want to. Alive in Christ. I'm dead to sin. So this is when you bring vanity out of you and you put it on, trial, and you convict it as you're part of what's messing with me. Vanity, making me feel as though I have a certain self-importance, and making it seem as though that I'm better than I actually am, when I should be more humble than I am, or appear to others, But that's just vanity. That's just vanity. But here you would have a question about sins that run the world. This is this is what you ask AI. Sins that run the world. Sins that run the world, and AI gonna tell you, sins that run the world. Nothing runs the world. God runs the world. And that's far from the actual truth. The truth is that the sins that run the world, often referred to as the 7 deadly sins. Sins that run the world are also referred to as, the 7 deadly sins. Pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth, which, according to Roman Catholic theology, inspires further sin. So this is where you have the loop of sin. Just it leads to other sin, and as long as you leads to other sin, that sin leads to other sins, and leads to other sins and other sins, and so you're in a loop. You're inside of what you would call a matrix. So here's a more detailed look at these sins. Pride, an excessive belief in one's own abilities, leading to arrogance and contempt for others. Greed, an excessive desire for material possessions or wealth. Lust, an excessive or uncontrolled desire for sexual pleasure. Envy, a feeling of discontent or resentment towards others, often due to their possessions or achievement. Gluttony, excessive eating or drinking or an excessive indulgence in any pleasure. Wrath, intense anger or a violent outburst. Sloth, a lack of diligence, laziness, or indifference to spiritual matters. You know, so these are the sins that run the world. You know, these are what runs the world. This is what comprises our matrix is comprised of. You know, and like I said, religion has become a part of the matrix. So the religion is, a form of pride. It'll give you, because you have a certain word, whether it's Islam faith or it's the Christian faith, because you have, that particular book, it leads you to arrogance and a contempt for others. Where you have the Muslims, they talk about the infidels, and you'll have the Christians talk about, non-believers or Gentiles or whoever you may have, and you even have the Jews, and they talk about the Gentiles, and you have all sorts of division and contempt for others when you're dealing with these religions. And greed is a huge part of our world, with a desire for material possessions or wealth, and lust, an excessive or uncontrollable desire for sexual pleasures. They have lust demons that they bombard you with lust every day, whether it's in songs, whether it's in TV shows, whether it's in social media, wherever it's at. You're bombarded with a desire for sexual pleasure. Relationships, even marriages, and you desire a certain partner. And envy, a feeling of discontent or resentment towards others. This is the reason why there's all the crime that's plaguing, like in the inner cities and certain neighborhoods and communities. There's a feeling of discontent or resentment towards each other, and it's often due to possessions or achievements, But then you have gluttony, excessive drinking or eating or an excessive indulgence in any pleasure, and intense anger or wrath, wrath is an intense anger or violent outburst. This is what also comes along with envy. Envy can create wrath, and as you see, resentment towards others, often due to their possessions or achievement, which can provoke intense anger or violent outbursts. Then you have sloth, which is a lack of diligence, laziness, or indifference to spiritual matters. And that doesn't always include just laziness. Sometimes it could just be, not taking the initiative to search a matter, to study, to show yourself approved, to or just being indifferent to spiritual matters. You're not getting the spirit of certain things because I'm just going to receive the word of it. I don't need the spirit, and the spirit is, the juicy nectar of receiving certain things. So that's the sins that run the sins that run the world, which would be all intertwined in what you would want to call the matrix. What you would want to call the matrix. And because of that, you're able to glamorize a lot of things in this world. Pride is a form of a way for you to glamorize. And then once you see it, you'll greed, you'll envy for it, you'll lust for it, you'll have a greed for it, and then you'll indulge in it with gluttony, and then, you'll protect it with wrath, and then because you're not one that seeks out a spiritual matter, you'll become sloth in it, you'll become lazy in it, and this has just become part of your world. So these are ways that the seven deadly sins controls the world. And if it controls the world and you're a part of the world, this is what controls you. This is what controls you. But as you're able to step outside of that world and learn what it is to safeguard you from the seven deadly sins, and how each one of these have an opposite quality, that if you learn them and you put them inside of you, then you're able to overcome them. You're able to overcome each and every last single one of these sins. And that'll keep you from outside of the matrix. And not only that, but you can come in and out as you please, because you know what it is that overcomes it. But you don't want to dilly and dally inside of there, because these things lead to destruction. This leads to destruction. But the thing is to redeem yourself from them. And they wanted to know, what is the most common sin in the world according to you. The sin of pride, without a doubt. Pride is a sin that is so perversive, runs so deep within us that we often don't even sense it is there. So pride, we don't even understand that pride is prevalent in us. Pride is what gets us to reject, conviction. It makes us, shun certain things that we need, that may be beneficial for our spiritual growth, which, would come underneath sloth. It'll make you indifferent to spiritual matters, So pride is amongst those sins that we are confronted with, that if it's present and you don't even know it's present, you'll pass a lot of spiritual growing, and spiritual maturity, because pride is preventing you from receiving any kind of spiritual enlightenment. Oh, I'm not receiving nothing from him. I don't listen to her. Oh man, I hear about what they talking about. It'll make you shun certain people, because it's a spirit that's in you that's is demonic. And I seen or felt it, not too long ago, where I fell asleep and it was something on, something like they was talking about, it was something that they was talking about, and there was a spirit around, and they was arguing with the person, that was, actually convicting you, and I was able to wake up, and I seen like, oh, nah, dog, he's right. What is you talking about? Like, it's a spirit that you don't even know that's in you, that'll reject the truth, and will go back and forth with the truth. Will go back and forth with the truth, and you don't even know that spirit is in you. And yeah, we are all going to be confronted with these things, and we have to overcome them. So that is the part of what we need to be redeemed from. The sins. These are the sins of the world. If you don't understand them, then and how deep they are rooted in, you know, our our you know, our societies, our civilizations, whatever you want to call them, these communities we live in, neighborhoods we live in, televisions we watch, the social medias we visit, the YouTube that we post on and that we receive certain things from. These are all the sins that we're confronted with. You know. So I wanted to share that. You know, because a lot of people think the gospel, it's a fairy tale, and it's not a fairy tale. If the gospel is received, and it's applied, it's a good thing. And it stated that in 2 Timothy. Said that the Bible is not for the righteous. It's not for righteous people, and it's for redeeming. It's for redemption. It's for the law. The law is not for the righteous. Let's get it real quick before we get off of here. You got it right here. We realize that the law is not enacted for the righteous. The law serves to expose sin and guide the unrighteous towards repentance. It is not a means of salvation, but a tool to reveal our need for Christ. The law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and for sinners, for the unholy and profane, for murderers. It gives you a whole list of, who the law is for. Murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers. So that the law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and for the sinners, for the unholy and profane, for the murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers. So there you have, yeah. It is for people who are against God and are sinful and who are unholy and ungodly, who kill their fathers and mothers, who murder. So, that's what the law is for. And while we strive to be righteous, we recognize what's interfering with our righteousness, and as we see what it is, we have to bring it from inside of us, and confront it. And after we confront it, we're able to let it depart from us. This is why they say the sin leaves, and when it leaves, it comes. The unclean spirit leaves, and when it comes back with 7 others. There's with 7 other unclean spirits. But I wanted to share that because God told me that it's something about glamorizing the gospel that is keeping people from actually acting on the gospel, because there's a glamorized form of it, and it's what we can't do. We can't glamorize the word, because you leave out the spirit. Because you need the spirit wouldn't allow you to glamorize the word. Once you have the spirit, all the glory would be attached to you, and it overshines the glamour, because the glory is not something that the earth can buy. You can't buy the glory. You can buy the glamour, you can't buy the glory. You can't buy the glory, but the glamour is different, and it have an appearance like it's the glory, and you would think that this comes from God. This has to come from God because it's so attractive and it's appealing. you know. But that's not where, the glory comes from. The glory comes from God, and the glamour comes from this world. You get you glamorize things of the world, through pride and through vanity and envy and these things and greed and gluttony and stuff like that will have you underneath a glamour state. Like this thing is what is the telltale signs of glamour. And then you would have these virtues that, if you know them, you know, if you know them, then you know that they are, humility, patience, kindness, diligence, charity, temperance, chastity. And each one of these are the counterparts to these. Where you have humility. With greed, you'll have charity. We have charity through greed. I mean, you'll be more charitable than greedy. With lust, you'll have chastity. With lust, you'll have chastity. With diligence, you'll be able to overcome the sloth. With patience, you'll be able to overcome wrath. You're able to overcome wrath. And with kindness, you'll be able to overcome envy. All these things have, opposite counterparts that once you do learn them, once you learn these, you're able to combat, the sins of the world, the sins that make the world go round. This protects you, when everything is moderation, when you're dealing with moderation, and control of desires. If you don't control your desires will control you, and these are things that you just have to know. So I wanted to share that because like I said, it was laid on me. I was laying down, and the word glamorizing the gospel came to me, and I said, glamorizing the gospel, what does that even mean? And because you see a lot of people that's benefiting from the gospel, but you don't see a lot of the works, and the service being, fulfilled in the world. And that it's because the people don't have a necessity for carrying out service, but being recipients of, or benefits of the word. So that goes back to our glamorizing the gospel. It goes back to glamorizing, the gospel. Focus on success over service. Focus more on success. I want to be successful. Everybody wants to be successful here, but nobody wants to be put in service. Service of others. This is why they call church service, because you go there, as a form of service. And this is what we tend to believe is putting in work, for God, and giving praise and shouting and dancing and shouting and passing out and stuff like that. That's not praising God. Praising God is through righteous works and service, and serving others. That's how you praise God. That's what's appealing to God, and getting people to repent from their sins and redeeming mankind is where you praise God, not through shouting and screaming and dancing. And this is how you actually praise yourself. through shouting and screaming and singing and dancing. That doesn't do anything for God, but for man. That doesn't do anything. That's not God sitting back. All right, it's Sunday, y'all. Go ahead. No, it's not God doing that. Be more redemptive. Do that in communities that are plagued by gun violence. That may be pleasing and appealing. Not in churches. No, not in churches. Pastor Collection played around, in neighborhoods that's plagued with homelessness. By the end of the service, y'all don't raise. I seen a video where somebody raised $40K. By the end of the service, y'all don't raise enough money to house these people for a whole year. And by the time he's been housed for a whole year, he don't got his whole life back together. He got a job, got him back to school. These are things that would be more appealing and pleasing to God. Not going to church and screaming and singing and dancing and shouting and falling out and stuff like that.